Commander Daeho Kim floated near the observation window of the orbital defense station New Seoul, watching Earth spin slowly below. The blue marble looked peaceful from up here, with white clouds drifting over the continents like cotton balls. He had been stationed on this platform for 3 years now, and the view never got old. Earth was home to 8 billion people, and they all depended on stations like this one to keep them safe from whatever dangers might come from the dark spaces between the stars. The morning shift had started 2 hours ago. Daeho sipped his coffee and checked the long-range sensors for the 100th time that week. Nothing unusual showed up on the screens, just the normal traffic of cargo ships and passenger vessels moving between Earth and the outer colonies. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Trade Consortium for 30 years now, but they were still considered the new kids in the cosmic neighborhood. Most of the alien species treated humans like children who needed to be watched carefully. Captain Soo-Jin Park was running diagnostics on the defense grid from the command center. She was younger than Daeho but had proven herself many times over during the small conflicts with space pirates and rogue asteroids. Her fingers danced across the control panels as she checked each weapon system and shield generator. Everything was running perfectly, just like it had been for months. Sometimes Soo-Jin wondered if they were wasting their time up here, watching for threats that would never come. The first sign of trouble came from the Deep Space Monitoring Array. Communications Officer Hyunwoo Lee was sitting in the underground bunkers beneath Busan when his equipment started screaming warnings. Massive energy signatures were appearing at the edge of the solar system, moving faster than anything in the known databases. He tried to get a clear reading on the contacts, but they were using some kind of jamming technology that made his sensors fuzzy and unreliable. Hyunwoo reached for his communication headset and started broadcasting on all emergency channels. His voice was steady even though his hands were shaking. He had trained for this moment but never thought it would actually happen. The readings were showing at least 200 ships, all of them much larger than anything humanity had ever built. They were coming straight for Earth with no attempts to communicate or identify themselves. On the New Seoul station, alarms started blaring throughout the corridors. Daeho dropped his coffee cup and rushed to the command center where Soo-Jin was already pulling up tactical displays. The screens showed red dots moving through space like drops of blood in water. Each dot represented a ship that could probably destroy their entire defense platform with a single shot. Soo-Jin counted the contacts and felt her stomach drop into her boots. They were outnumbered by more than 10 to 1. The alien fleet belonged to the Velkari Empire, though the humans did not know this yet. The Velkari were a warrior race that had conquered 3 star systems through brutal military campaigns. They believed that strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe, and they saw humanity's rapid expansion as a threat to their dominance. Their supreme war marshal had decided that humans needed to be destroyed before they became too dangerous to control. The Velkari ships were sleek and dark, built for war and nothing else. They had been traveling for weeks to reach Earth, and their crews were eager for battle. The war marshal stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the blue planet through the view screen. He had studied human military capabilities and found them laughable. These creatures had only been in space for a few generations, while the Velkari had been conquering worlds for thousands of years. The war marshal gave the order to attack without any warning or demand for surrender. This was not meant to be a negotiation or a test of strength. This was an extermination. The Velkari wanted to send a message to the rest of the galaxy that challenging their empire would result in complete destruction. They planned to leave, just enough humans alive to serve as slaves and examples of what happened to species that grew too ambitious. Energy beams lanced down from the Velkari ships like lightning from an angry god. The first target was New York City, where the United Nations headquarters had been expanded to include representatives from a dozen alien species. The building vanished in a flash of superheated plasma, taking half the city with it. London was next, then Tokyo, then Moscow. Each strike was perfectly calculated to cause maximum damage to both the infrastructure and the human spirit. Soo-Jin watched the feeds from Earth in horror as the cities she had visited as a child disappeared in columns of fire and smoke. The Tao orbital defense stations opened fire with everything they had, but their weapons barely scratched the paint on the Velkari ships. The aliens had shields that could absorb the energy of a small star, while human technology was still based on primitive fusion reactors and chemical propellants. Sol was burning when Daeho tried to contact his family on the surface. The communication channels were jammed with emergency broadcasts and screaming voices. He could see the fires from orbit, spreading across the city like a red cancer. His wife and children lived in the southern district, which had been hit directly by one of the energy beams. The entire area was now a crater of molten glass and twisted metal. The attack lasted for 6 hours. By the time the Velkari stopped firing, 30 major cities were gone and over 2 billion humans were dead. The aliens had been careful not to destroy everything, leaving enough population centers intact to serve as examples. They wanted the survivors to see what happened when someone challenged the Velkari Empire and to remember that it could happen again at any time. The Supreme War Marshal broadcast a message on all human communication frequencies. His voice was cold and mechanical, translated by computers that had studied human languages for decades. He told the survivors that they had 2 choices: submit to Velkari rule immediately or watch the rest of their planet burn. He gave them 24 hours to decide, which he considered generous for such a primitive species. Hyunwoo was still alive in his bunker beneath Busan, though the city above him was nothing but rubble and radiation. His communication equipment had survived the attack, and he was one of the few people on Earth who still had contact with the off-world colonies. He listened to the Velkari ultimatum and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. These aliens thought they had broken humanity with one surprise attack, but they had made a serious mistake. Sujin was floating in the wreckage of the New Seoul station, her body held in place by the emergency magnetic clamps on her suit. Most of the station had been destroyed, but the communication array was still working. She could hear voices from the other defense platforms, the ones that had survived the initial attack. They were asking for orders, waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Daeho was trapped in a collapsed section of the command center, but he was still alive and his suit radio was functioning. He could hear the voices of the other survivors, scattered across the orbital platforms and hidden bunkers on Earth. They were scared and angry and heartbroken, but they were not broken. The Velkari had killed their families and destroyed their cities, but they had not destroyed the human spirit. Hyunwoo composed a message and sent it out on all the emergency channels, broadcasting to every human colony and outpost in known space. His words were simple and direct, without any of the diplomatic language that aliens expected from civilized species. He told them what had happened to Earth and what the Velkari were demanding. Then he added something that would soon become legendary throughout the galaxy. The message was short and to the point. Message received and understood. Response will follow shortly. Hyunwoo did not explain what the response would be or when it would come. He simply closed the channel and began working on his equipment, preparing for the next phase of what was about to become the most one-sided war in galactic history. The Velkari War Marshal heard the human response and laughed until his sides hurt. These creatures were still trying to sound brave even after losing most of their planet. He looked forward to seeing how long their defiance would last once he started destroying their remaining cities one by one. In his experience, most species begged for mercy within the first week of occupation. What the War Marshal did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario for decades, ever since their first contact with alien civilizations. They had learned that the galaxy was a dangerous place filled with predators who saw weakness as an invitation to attack. The humans had smiled and played nice with their alien neighbors, but they had also been building weapons and making plans for the day when diplomacy would no longer be enough. The day when the sky burned was over, but the real war was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the Velkari burned the sky above Earth. The aliens were waiting for humanity's formal surrender, expecting broken refugees to crawl out of their hiding places and beg for mercy. Instead, they were starting to see things that made no sense according to their intelligence reports about human capabilities. Dr. Mi-Young Cho was working in a laboratory that officially did not exist, buried 3 kilometers beneath the mountains of North Korea. The facility had been built in secret over the past 15 years, funded by black budget programs that even most government officials knew nothing about. Mi-young had been recruited straight out of university by people who told her that humanity needed weapons the aliens would never expect. The project was called Deep Winter, and it had been designed to give humanity a fighting chance against superior alien technology. Mi-young and her team had been reverse engineering every piece of alien tech they could get their hands on, from crashed meteorites to borrowed components from trade ships. They had also been developing theoretical weapons that violated several Galactic Consortium treaties, but Earth had never fully signed those agreements anyway. Admiral Taemin Yoon was coordinating the human response from a command bunker hidden beneath the Australian outback. The facility had been disguised as a mining operation, complete with fake equipment and dummy personnel who thought they were actually digging for rare earth metals. Taemin had been planning for this war since he was a junior officer, studying every alien military doctrine and looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. The Valkyrie had made their first mistake by assuming that Earth's government and military were centralized like their own empire. They had targeted the major cities and official installations, but humanity had learned long ago to scatter their most important assets across the planet and beyond. The real command structure was hidden in places the aliens would never think to look, connected by quantum communication arrays that could not be jammed or intercepted. Captain Ji-hai Kang was aboard the stealth ship Silent Runner, drifting in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Her vessel was one of 50 identical ships that had been built in secret shipyards hidden throughout the outer system. The ships used experimental technology that bent light around their hulls, making them invisible to most sensors. They had been waiting in the dark for years, supplied by automated cargo drones and crewed by volunteers who knew they might never see Earth again. The Valkyrie occupation force was getting comfortable in Earth orbit, setting up communication relays and scanning stations to monitor the human population. They had divided the planet into administrative zones and were preparing to install puppet governments that would keep the survivors in line. The Supreme War Marshal was already planning his victory celebration and thinking about which worlds he would conquer next. What the Valkyrie did not know was that humanity had 37 colony worlds scattered across 17 star systems. Most of these colonies were officially listed as mining outposts or research stations, but they had been quietly building industrial facilities and military bases for decades. The colonies had been designed to be self-sufficient, capable of supporting themselves indefinitely without contact from Earth. Engineer Dong-Sik Park was working on Titan Base, humanity's largest off-world shipyard hidden beneath the methane lakes of Saturn's moon. The facility had been carved out of solid ice and rock, invisible from orbit and shielded from all known scanning technologies. Dong-Sik had been building warships for 20 years, following designs that pushed human engineering to its absolute limits. The ships coming out of Titan Base were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They used fusion drives that could accelerate at rates that would crush most alien species, armor made from crystallized carbon that was harder than diamond, and weapon systems based on technologies that most civilizations considered impossible to weaponize. Each ship was built to fight enemies with superior numbers and firepower, designed to hit hard and disappear before the enemy could respond. The first sign that something was wrong came when a Valkyrie patrol ship failed to report in from the outer system. The crew had been investigating some unusual asteroid movements near Jupiter when their ship simply vanished from all sensors. The Valkyrie command assumed it was a mechanical failure or a collision with space debris, but they sent another patrol to investigate. The second patrol ship also disappeared, along with the search and rescue team that was sent to find them. Now the Valkyrie were starting to worry, but they still assumed they were dealing with some kind of natural phenomenon or equipment malfunction. Their ships were protected by shields that could stop anything humans were supposed to be able to build, and their armor was designed to survive direct hits from fusion bombs. Colonel Young Ho Nam was leading the first organized resistance cells on the surface of Earth. His teams were made up of survivors from the destroyed cities, people who had lost everything and had nothing left except their hatred for the aliens who had murdered their families. Young Ho had been training guerrilla fighters for years, preparing them for exactly this kind of occupation scenario. The resistance was not trying to fight the Valkyrie ships directly. since that would be suicide with conventional weapons. Instead, they were targeting the support systems that the aliens needed to maintain their occupation. Communication relays were sabotaged with homemade explosives, supply depots were poisoned with industrial chemicals, and Velkari ground troops were picked off one by snipers using weapons that fired projectiles too small and fast to be detected by alien sensors. Dr. Mi Young Cho was putting the finishing touches on her first prototype weapon, something she called a gravity lance. The device used controlled gravitational fields to tear apart molecular bonds, essentially causing solid matter to dissolve into component atoms. The weapon required enormous amounts of energy and could only fire a few shots before burning out, but each shot could punch a hole through several meters of the strongest known materials. The gravity lance was loaded onto one of Jihai Kang's stealth ships and tested against a captured Velkari patrol vessel. The alien ship's shields flared and died instantly, overwhelmed by forces they were not designed to handle. The hull armor, which was supposed to be impervious to human weapons, crumbled like wet sand. The test was a complete success, and Mi Young immediately began working on more powerful versions of the weapon. Admiral Tae Min Yoon was coordinating attacks across dozens of star systems, using the quantum communication arrays to send orders instantaneously across impossible distances. Human ships were emerging from hidden bases throughout the galaxy, attacking Velkari supply lines and support facilities with surgical precision. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The Velkari military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and direct confrontation, tactics that had worked against every other species they had encountered. They would assemble large fleets, engage the enemy in open battle, and crush them through superior firepower and numbers. Humans were fighting a completely different kind of war, one that the Velkari were not prepared for. Commander So-Ra Jung was leading a raid on a Velkari logistics station in the Alpha Centauri system. Her team had infiltrated the facility using captured alien uniforms and forged identification codes, then planted fusion charges throughout the station's power grid. The explosion destroyed millions of tons of supplies and equipment that had been intended for the occupation of Earth. The Velkari were starting to realize that they had seriously underestimated their enemy. Human weapons were proving to be far more advanced than their intelligence had suggested, and human tactics were unlike anything in their military manuals. Worse still, the humans seemed to know everything about Velkari technology and procedures, as if they had been studying the Empire for decades. Dr. Wu Jin Hong was analyzing captured Velkari equipment in another secret laboratory, this one hidden beneath the Amazon rainforest. His team had been dissecting alien technology since humanity's first contact with the Galactic Consortium, learning how their enemies thought and how their systems worked. Every piece of information was stored in quantum databases and shared with resistance cells throughout human space. The Velkari had built their empire on the assumption that they were technologically superior to everyone else. But humanity had been closing that gap in secret for 30 years. Human scientists had been working around the clock to develop countermeasures for every alien weapon system and defense technology. They had also been looking for weaknesses in Velkari psychology and social structure, preparing for psychological warfare on a scale never before attempted. The Supreme War Marshal was receiving increasingly disturbing reports from his commanders throughout the galaxy. Velkari bases were being attacked by unknown enemies using impossible weapons and tactics. Supply convoys were disappearing without a trace, and entire patrol fleets were being destroyed by forces that could not be detected or tracked. The Empire was bleeding resources and manpower at an alarming rate. What worried the War Marshal most was that the attack seemed coordinated, as if a single intelligence was directing operations across dozens of star systems simultaneously. The humans on Earth were 6 months after the bombing of Earth. The Velkari Empire was facing problems that kept their military commanders awake at night. Supply convoys that should have arrived at their forward bases never showed up, leaving entire battle groups stranded without fuel or ammunition. Patrol ships sent to investigate these disappearances would vanish themselves, leaving behind nothing but expanding clouds of metallic debris and confused radio transmissions about ghost ships that could not be detected by any known sensor technology. Colonel Young Ho Nam was standing in the ruins of what used to be downtown Seoul, looking up at the Velkari occupation headquarters that had been built on top of the crater where the old government district once stood. The alien building was a massive, black pyramid designed to intimidate the human population with its size and aggressive architecture. Young Ho smiled as he checked his watch and counted down the seconds until the charges his team had placed would turn that symbol of occupation into a pile of smoking rubble. The explosion was beautiful in its precision, shaped charges cutting through the pyramid's support structures like a hot knife through butter. The building collapsed in on itself with a rumble that could be heard for kilometers, sending a column of dust and debris into the sky. Young Ho and his team were already gone by the time the first Velkari rescue ships arrived, vanishing into the tunnel networks that had been secretly expanded beneath every major human city for decades. The Velkari response was swift and brutal, just as Young Ho had expected. They rounded up 1,000 human civilians and executed them in the public square where the pyramid had stood, broadcasting the killings on every remaining communication channel. Their message was clear: any attack on Velkari personnel would result in the deaths of innocent humans at a ratio of 50-1. What the aliens did not understand was that their retaliation had exactly the opposite effect of what they intended. The public executions convinced every remaining human on Earth that there could be no negotiation or coexistence with the Velkari. The aliens had revealed themselves to be monsters who would murder children to make a point, which meant that every human now had a moral duty to fight them to the death. Commander So-Ra Jung was aboard the stealth ship Dark Angel, drifting silent and invisible near a major Velkari supply depot in the Proxima Centauri system. Her ship was one of the new Hunter-class vessels that had been designed specifically for deep penetration raids behind enemy lines. The Dark Angel was equipped with experimental systems that allowed it to mimic the energy signatures of Velkari ships, making it appear friendly on alien sensors until it was too late for them to react. The supply depot was a massive structure, built into the surface of an airless moon, connected to orbital docking platforms by heavy cargo elevators. Thousands of Velkari personnel worked around the clock to process the ammunition, fuel, and equipment needed to maintain their occupation forces throughout human space. The facility was protected by defensive satellites and patrol ships, but none of them were expecting an attack from something that looked like one of their own vessels. So-Ra brought the Dark Angel into docking position at one of the orbital platforms, transmitting the proper identification codes that had been extracted from captured Velkari computers. The alien dock workers guided her ship into position without suspicion, assuming it was just another supply vessel arriving with a routine cargo delivery. They had no way of knowing that the Dark Angel's cargo hold was packed with enough antimatter to crack a moon in half. The antimatter charges were not set to explode immediately, since that would have been too merciful for the aliens who had murdered billions of innocent humans. Instead, they were programmed to detonate in sequence over several hours, giving the Velkari personnel enough time to realize what was happening, but not enough time to evacuate or defend themselves. So-Ra wanted them to feel the same helpless terror that human civilians had experienced during the bombing of Earth. Dr. Mi-Young Cho was working on her latest project in the Deep Winter facility, something she called a singularity torpedo. The weapon used artificial gravity fields to create microscopic black holes that would consume everything in their path until they finally evaporated through Hawking radiation. Each torpedo was the size of a small missile but carried enough destructive potential to destroy a battleship or even a small moon if properly targeted. The technical challenges were enormous, since containing a black hole required precise manipulation of gravitational fields and exotic matter that existed only in laboratory conditions. Mi-Young had been working on the mathematics for years, using quantum computers that had been built specifically for this project. The first successful test had been conducted in an empty region of space beyond Pluto, where the torpedo had successfully created a black hole that consumed several asteroids before safely evaporating. Admiral Taemin Yoon was coordinating the systematic destruction of Velkari infrastructure throughout their empire, using intelligence gathered by human agents who had been infiltrating alien society for decades. The humans had learned to think like their enemies, studying Velkari psychology and culture until they could predict their reactions and exploit their weaknesses with surgical precision. The key insight was that the Velkari military depended entirely on centralized logistics and command structures, unlike human forces that were designed to operate independently for extended periods. Cut off their supply lines and communication networks, and entire Velkari battle groups would become helpless within weeks. The aliens had built an empire based on overwhelming force, but force was useless if you could not feed your soldiers or tell them where to fight. Captain Jihi Kang was leading a hunting pack of stealth ships through the outer regions of Velkari space, tracking down merchant convoys and cargo vessels that were trying to avoid the main shipping lanes. Her ships moved through space like sharks through dark water, using passive sensors to detect the energy signatures of alien vessels from impossible distances. Once they found their prey, the attack would be over in seconds, leaving nothing behind but twisted metal and unanswered distress calls. The Velkari had tried to adapt by sending their supply ships in heavily escorted convoys, but this only made them easier targets for human weapons. The escorts could not protect what they could not see, and human stealth technology had advanced far beyond anything the aliens thought possible. A single human ship could destroy an entire convoy and vanish before the surviving aliens even realized they were under attack. Engineer Dong-Sik Park was overseeing the construction of the first Nemesis-class battleships at the Titan facility, vessels that were designed to fight and defeat Velkari capital ships in direct combat. Each Nemesis was nearly 2 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet, protected by armor and shields that incorporated the most advanced human technology. The ships were also equipped with quantum computers that could process tactical information faster than any organic mind. The first 3 Nemesis ships were completed ahead of schedule, their crews trained in combat simulators that used detailed intelligence about Velkari vessels and tactics. The ships were armed with gravity lances, singularity torpedoes, and plasma cannons that fired streams of ionized matter at significant fractions of light speed. Each vessel also carried a complement of smaller ships and automated drones that could operate independently if the main ship was damaged or destroyed. Dr. Wu Jin Hong had been analyzing captured Velkari personnel for months, studying their biology and psychology to find exploitable weaknesses. His research had revealed that the aliens were particularly vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic radiation that were harmless to humans but could disrupt Velkari nervous systems. This information had been used to develop non-lethal weapons that could incapacitate alien soldiers without killing them, making interrogation and intelligence gathering much easier. The psychological warfare campaign was proving even more effective than the physical attacks. Human agents had infiltrated Velkari communication networks and were broadcasting carefully crafted propaganda that played on alien fears and prejudices. The messages suggested that the Empire's leaders were incompetent cowards who were sacrificing their soldiers for personal glory, while also implying that humanity had access to weapons that could destroy entire star systems if provoked too far. Specialist Chan Young Lee was operating deep behind enemy lines, disguised as a Velkari merchant and gathering intelligence about alien military installations and troop movements. Her genetic modifications and surgical alterations allowed her to pass for a member of the occupying species, while her neural implants provided real-time translation and cultural guidance. She had been living among the aliens for months, learning their weaknesses and preparing for the next phase of humanity's counterattack. The Velkari Empire was starting to fracture under the pressure of the human insurgency. Several subject species that had been conquered by the Empire were beginning to rebel, sensing that their overlords were not as invincible as they had appeared. The aliens were being forced to divert resources from their occupation of Earth to deal with uprisings on dozens of other worlds, stretching their military forces beyond their breaking point. The Supreme War. 1 year after the first Velkari attack on Earth, the alien empire was dying a slow and agonizing death. What had started as a simple pacification mission had become a nightmare that consumed resources and manpower at an unsustainable rate. Half of the Velkari fleet was scattered debris floating in the void, their crews vaporized by weapons that should not exist according to galactic law. The Empire's economy was collapsing as trade routes became hunting grounds for invisible human predators who struck without warning and vanished without a trace. General Hanul Kim stood in the command center of the battleship Vengeance, watching tactical displays that showed the systematic dismantling of Velkari power throughout the galaxy. Her ship was one of the new Nemesis-class vessels, bristling with weapons that could crack moons and armor that could withstand the explosion of stars. The Vengeance had been built in the hidden shipyards of Titan, constructed from materials that were theoretically impossible to obtain and powered by reactors that bent the laws of physics to their breaking point. The bridge crew was working with quiet efficiency, coordinating attacks across dozens of star systems, while monitoring the status of resistance cells throughout Velkari space. Each officer had lost family during the bombing of Earth, and their dedication to the war effort was absolute. They did not fight for glory or conquest, but for justice and the memory of the billions who had died in the first alien attack. Specialist Chan Young Lee was operating from within the heart of the Velkari Empire, disguised as a low-level bureaucrat in the alien government. Her surgical modifications were perfect, allowing her to walk among the enemy without suspicion while gathering intelligence about their military capabilities and political structure. She had been sending detailed reports to Human Command for months, providing the information needed to target the Empire's weak points with surgical precision. The intelligence Chan Young had gathered revealed that the Velkari were not the unified military force they pretended to be. Their empire was held together by fear and brutality, with dozens of subject species that hated their alien overlords and would rebel if given the opportunity. The Velkari military was also riven with internal politics and corruption, with competing factions that cared more about personal advancement than military effectiveness. Dr. Mi Young Cho had completed her latest weapon system, something she called a temporal disruptor. The device used controlled distortions in spacetime to age targets at an accelerated rate, causing enemy ships and installations to crumble into dust within seconds. The technology was based on theoretical physics that most alien scientists considered impossible, but human researchers had been pushing the boundaries of known science for decades. The temporal disruptor had been tested against a captured Velkari battleship, with results that exceeded all expectations. The alien vessel had simply dissolved as if it were being eaten by invisible acid, its hull plates and internal systems aging millions of years in the span of a few heartbeats. The weapon required enormous amounts of energy and could only be used sparingly, but its psychological impact on alien crews was devastating. Admiral Tae-min Yoon was orchestrating the liberation of Velkari subject worlds, using human special forces teams to arm and train local resistance movements. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity: turn the Empire's own oppressed populations against their masters, creating internal conflicts that would consume Velkari resources, while human forces prepared for the final assault on their homeworld systems. The liberation campaigns were succeeding beyond all expectations. Species that had been enslaved by the Velkari for generations were rising up with desperate fury, using weapons provided by human agents and tactics taught by human advisors. The aliens found themselves fighting wars on dozens of fronts simultaneously. Their military forces stretched beyond their breaking point as they tried to maintain control over their crumbling empire. Captain Ji-Hai Kang was leading a task force of stealth ships toward the heavily defended Velkari fortress world of Kethvar, where the aliens maintained their primary weapons research facilities. The planet was surrounded by defensive satellites and patrol fleets, protected by energy shields that could supposedly withstand anything short of a supernova. Ji-Hai smiled grimly as she reviewed the attack plan, knowing that the aliens were about to discover just how wrong their assumptions were. The assault on Kethvar began with a single transmission from Ji-Hai's flagship, a message directed at the planet's military commander. "This is Captain Ji-Hai Kang of the Human Liberation Fleet. You have 60 seconds to surrender unconditionally before we demonstrate why attacking Earth was the worst mistake your species ever made." The alien commander's response was a burst of weapons fire that harmlessly splashed against the human ship's shields. Ji-Hai gave the order to commence the attack, and space around Kethvar erupted in violence unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human ships that had been invisible moments before suddenly appeared throughout the star system, their weapons tearing through Velkari defenses like paper. Gravity lances punched through energy shields, singularity torpedoes consumed entire battle stations, and temporal disruptors aged defensive satellites into scrap metal. The Velkari had made a desperate gamble in response to their mounting losses. They issued an ultimatum to the human colonies: surrender immediately or watch as Earth's remaining cities were reduced to radioactive craters. The threat was broadcast on all communication channels, accompanied by images of Velkari ships moving into bombardment positions above the battered planet. The alien ultimatum backfired spectacularly when Insu Park, broadcasting from a bunker beneath the ruins of Seoul, delivered humanity's response to the galaxy. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke, but his words carried the cold fury of an entire species pushed beyond their breaking point. He told the Velkari that they had already destroyed Earth's cities and murdered billions of innocent people, so their threats were meaningless. Insu's message continued with a promise that chilled alien listeners throughout the galaxy. You have already taken everything from us that you possibly can. Our families are dead. Our cities are ruins. Our children will grow up in a world scarred by your cruelty. But we are still here, and we still remember what you did to us. We will hunt you across the galaxy until every last one of your ships is burning wreckage and every one of your worlds is a monument to the price of attacking humanity. The Velkari Supreme War Marshal realized too late that his ultimatum had been a catastrophic mistake. Instead of breaking human resolve, it had convinced every human in the galaxy that there could be no peace with the alien empire. Worse still, the message had been heard by species throughout the galaxy, many of whom were beginning to question whether the Velkari were truly as invincible as they claimed to be. Captain Yoonji Yoon was preparing to execute Operation Turnabout, the simultaneous assault on all three Velkari homeworlds that would mark the beginning of the end for their empire. Her fleet consisted of the most advanced human warships ever built, crewed by volunteers who had trained for years in preparation for this mission. Each ship carried enough firepower to sterilize a continent, and each crew member was motivated by the memory of friends and family who had died during the original attack on Earth. The three Velkari homeworlds were Kethrin, Veltara, and Zethmore, each protected by massive defensive fleets and orbital fortresses that had been built over centuries of conquest and expansion. The aliens considered these worlds to be impregnable, secure behind layers of energy shields and automated defense systems that had never been successfully challenged. Dr. Kyung-ho Shin was aboard the flagship Retribution, making final adjustments to the exotic weapons that would spearhead the assault on the homeworlds. His team had spent months calibrating gravitational manipulation devices, controlled singularity generators, and temporal distortion fields that existed only because human scientists had refused to accept the limitations that other species took for granted. The weapons Dr. Shin had developed were beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Gravitational bombs that could compress matter into neutron star densities, exotic matter projectors that could phase solid objects out of normal space-time, and quantum disruption fields that could unravel the fundamental forces holding atoms together. Each weapon was a masterpiece of applied theoretical physics, built by a species that had learned to weaponize the basic laws of reality. The attack on the Velkari homeworlds began exactly 1 year and 6 hours after the first alien ship had opened fire on Earth. Yoonji's fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of each system simultaneously, their weapons charging as they accelerated toward their targets at velocities that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. The Velkari defensive fleets scrambled to intercept them, but they were facing an enemy that had spent months studying their tactics and preparing countermeasures for every possible response. The battle was over in less than 3 hours. The Velkari homeworld fleets were annihilated by weapons they could not understand or defend against, their mighty fortresses reduced to expanding clouds of plasma and exotic particles. The planets themselves were left untouched, but every military installation, government facility, and weapons factory was precisely targeted and destroyed. 2 years after the Velkari had made the mistake of bombing Earth, the galaxy was a very different place. The once mighty empire that had dominated 3 star systems was nothing more than scattered refugee fleets begging for sanctuary from species they had once oppressed. Their military was destroyed, their government had collapsed, and their former territories were now protected by human warships and the liberated species who had thrown off their chains. Admiral Seo Jun Han stood on the bridge of the human flagship, eternal vigilance watching through the viewscreen as construction ships worked to complete humanity's newest orbital facility. The massive station was being built in the ruins of the former Velkari capital system, its gleaming hull a monument to both human engineering capabilities and their victory over those who had underestimated them. The eternal vigilance itself was a testament to how far human technology had advanced during the war. The ship was 5 kilometers long and incorporated technologies that made the rest of the galaxy's navies look like toys by comparison. Its hull was constructed from crystallized space-time that was literally harder than reality itself, while its weapons systems could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe with casual precision. The bridge crew was a mixture of humans and aliens, representatives of the dozens of species that had joined humanity's coalition during the liberation of Velkari space. They worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old galactic order, united by their shared experience of fighting against oppression and their recognition that humanity offered something genuinely different from the empires that had come before. President Yeon-Soo Kim was addressing the Galactic Consortium from her office in the rebuilt city of New Busan, the first major population center to be completely reconstructed after the Velkari bombing. The city was a marvel of human engineering, its buildings incorporating alien architectural styles, while being constructed with materials and techniques that existed only because human scientists had refused to accept the word impossible. Yeon-Soo had been elected by the survivors of Earth in the first democratic election held since the war began. Her campaign had been simple. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared for those who would do them harm, but neither would they become the monsters they had defeated. The balance between strength and compassion would define humanity's role in the galaxy going forward. The president's message to the consortium was diplomatically worded, but carried an unmistakable undertone of steel. She formally requested that humanity be granted full membership in the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Given humanity's recent contributions to galactic stability and their obvious military capabilities, she assumed there would be no objections to their application. The alien delegates listening to the speech understood the subtext perfectly. This was not really a request, but a statement of fact. Humanity had proven beyond any doubt that they possessed the power to enforce their will throughout the galaxy, but they were choosing to work within existing diplomatic frameworks rather than simply taking what they wanted. It was an offer of partnership that would be extremely unwise to refuse. Dr. Mi-Young Cho was working in her new laboratory complex on Mars, developing the next generation of human technology for peaceful purposes. The same principles that had created gravitational weapons and temporal disruptors were being applied to terraforming projects and faster-than-light communication systems that would benefit every species in the galaxy. The research facility was also training alien scientists in human technological methods, sharing knowledge that most civilizations would have kept secret for centuries. Mi-Young believed that the galaxy would be safer if everyone had access to advanced technology, rather than allowing any one species to maintain a monopoly on the most powerful weapons and tools. Captain Soo-Jin Park was leading a joint human-alien patrol through the former Velkari territories, ensuring that the peace was maintained and that no new tyrants arose to fill the power vacuum left by the Empire's collapse. Her ship carried a mixed crew of humans and former Velkari subjects, working together to protect the worlds that had been liberated from alien oppression. The patrol ships were equipped with the latest human technology, but also incorporated innovations developed by the other species in the coalition. The result was vessels that were more advanced than anything that had existed before the war, proof that cooperation between species could produce results that none of them could achieve alone. Engineer Dong-Sik Park was overseeing the construction of new shipyards throughout human space, facilities that would produce vessels for both human defense forces and the military fleets of their new allies. The shipyards used automated construction systems that could build entire fleets in a fraction of the time it had taken, using traditional methods, ensuring that the galaxy would never again be vulnerable to the kind of aggression the Velkari had represented. The new ships being produced were designed for peacekeeping rather than conquest, equipped with non-lethal weapons and advanced sensors that could detect threats long before they became dangerous. Each vessel also carried diplomatic facilities and cultural exchange programs that would help different species learn to work together more effectively. Commander Sora Jung was running the war crimes tribunals that were processing the captured Velkari leadership, ensuring that those responsible for the attack on Earth and the oppression of other species faced justice for their actions. The trials were conducted according to galactic law and overseen by representatives from multiple species, proving that humanity was committed to the rule of law even when dealing with their enemies. The tribunals were also serving an important educational function, documenting the crimes of the Velkari regime and ensuring that future generations would understand the consequences of allowing militaristic empires to grow unchecked. The testimony being gathered would become part of the historical record, a warning to any species that might be tempted to follow the Velkari path. Yunwoo Lee had been promoted to head of the new Galactic Communications Network, a system that would allow instantaneous communication between any 2 points in known space. The network was based on quantum entanglement principles that human scientists had perfected during the war, and it would be freely available to all members of the galactic community. The communications network was already changing how the galaxy operated, allowing for real-time coordination between species that had previously required months to exchange messages. Trade negotiations that had once taken years could now be completed in weeks, while diplomatic crises could be resolved before they escalated into military conflicts. Colonel Young Ho Nam was training the next generation of human military officers, but the curriculum had changed dramatically since the end of the war. The new officers were learning not just tactics and strategy, but also diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and the ethical use of overwhelming military power. They would be ambassadors as much as warriors, representing humanity's values to the galaxy. The Military Academy had also opened its doors to students from other species, creating the first truly interspecies officer corps in galactic history. The alien cadets were learning human military methods while also contributing their own cultural perspectives and tactical innovations, creating a more diverse and effective military organization. Dr. Wu Jin Hong had established the Galactic Institute for Psychological Research, studying the mental and emotional needs of different species to help prevent the kind of misunderstandings that had led to the war with the Velkari. The Institute was developing new techniques for cross-species communication and conflict resolution that would make future wars less likely. The research being conducted at the Institute was also helping to heal the psychological wounds left by the Velkari occupation. Trauma counseling programs had been established for both humans and the liberated alien populations, while cultural exchange programs were helping different species learn to trust and work with each other. Admiral Tae Min Yoon was implementing the new doctrine of active peacekeeping that would define humanity's military role in the galaxy going forward. Human fleets would patrol the space lanes to protect merchant shipping, respond to natural disasters and humanitarian crises, and intervene to prevent genocides and other atrocities wherever they occurred. The active peacekeeping doctrine was controversial among some alien species who worried about human military power, but it was supported by the smaller civilizations who had never been able to defend themselves against larger predatory empires. The doctrine included strict rules of engagement and oversight by the Galactic Consortium, ensuring that human forces could not be used for conquest or oppression. The ceremony marking humanity's formal admission to full membership in the Galactic Consortium was held aboard the Eternal Vigilance, with representatives from every known intelligent species in attendance. The event was broadcast throughout the galaxy, watched by trillions of beings who were witnessing the dawn of a new era in galactic civilization. Minji Choi, now a senior officer aboard a human patrol ship, was conducting a routine inspection of merchant vessels near the former